still and know thing. Be still and know is, when I was told to be still as a kid, it just meant I was in trouble. Especially if it was Kathleen Ann. They had the last name, not to come home, right? So, be still and know is a phrase that we use a lot in this philosophy. But I just want to emphasize that the be still doesn't mean sit down and shut up. It means become receptive. That stillness and that knowing is be receptive to the wisdom that is bubbling up from within you, from the divine that is within you, always has been, always will be. Whether you're listening to this now here in person or listening to it later on YouTube, hi guys, that truth is going to be. Now, we get in trouble, or I get in trouble, maybe I'm the only one, who gets in trouble when it comes to know. Know what? Know that I am God. Yeah, that's nice. What does that mean? In the book of Isaiah, it says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways. That doesn't mean we're less than or bad. It means that we have brains that are set up to think within duality. In order to be rational, rational comes from the word ratio, which is a comparison of two different things. In order to be in our rational mind, which most of us like to do, right? I mean, we choose to be somewhat rational in most of our days, yes? Oh, please, God, say yes. We cannot also be thinking from the infinite one mind. It just doesn't work to do both at once because one is dualistic and the other is monistic. So, sorry, there's an old joke about how many monists does it take to change a light bulb? Well, there's only one. So that choice to know the divine, that choice to know requires not words but experience and feeling. And then trying to share that with other people is like trying to describe the scent of a number 9. You both know what you're talking about in your own way and in your own world. But it might be a little bit difficult to hammer into a full grammatically correct English sentence, yes? So as we try to get out of our own story, the biggest story we have to get out of is our misperception about what God is. The biggest lie that has been handed down by people who didn't know it was a lie is that we are separate from the divine, that we are somehow unworthy of the divine, that somehow we haven't earned God's love yet. And I would suggest to you that, first of all, if you have to earn it, it's not love. If you have to earn it, it's not love. Love, in the divine sense, with a capital L, just is. And this misconception has colored our way of being in the world over and over and over again. When I was taught to read what we called the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures, when I was in Catholic school, called the Old Testament, I understood God to be kind of smitey and bad-tempered and someone to kind of hide from, frankly. But as I was reading Richard Rohr this week, who is a wonderful Franciscan monk, it talks about the biblical notion of justice is, as we understand it now, to be all about punishment and being cast out. But in truth, that biblical notion of justice, if you read the whole thing, is more about, it was the job of the prophets to make sure that people understood what justice is. And according to Richard Rohr, it's actually a restorative justice. It is, to quote him, after the prophet chastises the Israelites for their transgressions against Yahweh, the prophet continues by saying, in effect, and here's what Yahweh will do for you. God will now love you more than ever. God will love you into wholeness. God will pour upon you a gratuitous, unbelievable, unaccountable, irrefutable love that you will finally be unable to resist. It's not that this divine being that maybe some of us were raised with is out to get us. It's that that divine being already exists within us and loves us no matter what. As Rohr says, it's gratuitous, unbelievable, unaccountable, irrefutable, that you will finally be unable to resist. How does that change how we are in the world? If the divine being that in my gut I still try and stay separate from a little bit, because you never know when they might lose their temper. Watch the rain carefully, people. You see a big boat float by? Uh-oh. And, the thing is, we don't even know what ways that has affected how we are in the world. We are so steeped in this, it's kind of like a fish trying to describe salt water or water in general. We have no way of knowing that which it is we don't know. The assumptions we have, usually if we're lucky, we'll bump up against them, find out we were wrong, and be able to open up our hearts and minds just a little bit more to a greater truth. I found a story that exemplifies this I don't know what I don't know in a great way, and it was written by somebody who taught the hard of hearing deaf children in first and second grade. And she was talking about, they were in class one day, and one of the hard of hearing kids passed gas exuberantly and could not figure out why everybody was staring at him. And so she, with her 8 years of college, was qualified to go explain that deaf people don't hear farts, but hearing people do. And the kid's like, wait a minute, they can hear that? Really? Can they see it? And one of the other kids, of course, chimed in, yes, they can. It's a little green cloud. I saw it on TV. We are like that first grader that don't know how other people perceive the world, that don't know how the collective mind of God perceives the world. I trust that it is that God has more information than I do, being omniscient, that God has a bigger view than I do, being everywhere present. And so I do the best I can from my human space and trust that when intuition hits, it's that divine within me speaking through my body in a way I can understand. Intuition is how the divine mind that is within you communicates with your human brain. And so when you have a moment of intuition, that is your divinity speaking up. And you might need to get quiet enough so that the rest of the world isn't blocking out that intuition, so that as you move about in your world, you don't negate what you just learned through your intuition, because your personal experience is different. Because you're like that little first grader who couldn't hear bodily functions. So I'm going to take you on a mental journey with me. And I'm going to ask you just to consider whether you agree with the actual example or not. Consider that there's another way of looking at the world, and this is a thought experiment in doing that. Are you with me? You up for this? Once upon a time, there was a kid named Tony Hicks. He was 14. He was being raised by a single parent, his mother, in southeast LA, in a bad section of that part of town. And so to get him away from the gangs and the gunfire, and he had lost cousins to gang gunfire, just sitting innocently in their homes, she moved him down to San Diego to stay with his grandfather, who he called Daddy. He still was having some problems because within him there was a lot of anger. Within him there was a lot of confusion and hurt and fear. And so he ran away. January 25th, 1995. January 21st, 1995. Daddy went in and found a note on his bed saying, "I love you, I have to go." And so this 14-year-old is out on the streets. And it isn't until the following morning that the grandfather found out that while he was out on the streets, he was with 2 other kids his age and an 18-year-old, and he was joining a gang because that's what he understood to be safe. And they were in the North Park area of San Diego, and there was a gentleman by the name of Tariq delivering pizzas. And when Tariq refused to hand over the pizzas to these thieves, the 18-year-old was heard to say, "Shoot him, Bones." And that 14-year-old kid, Tony, became a murderer. What he didn't know was that a month before that happened, California had passed a law saying kids as young as him, in certain cases, could be tried as adults. And so he went to prison. It hits home for me because I lived in North Park. It hits home for me because I know his defense attorney. I actually worked with him when I was working for the Office of the Public Defender. And it hits home for me because one year while we were at one of our conferences, the father of Tariq Kamisa, whose name is Ahim, got up and spoke. And he talked about his experience of his first out-of-body experience when he just went blank when he found out his son was dead, his only son. He said he went to his knees and everything just became unreal. Now, he is a Sufi Muslim, and so he did what his spiritual path told him to do. He gets 30 days where his community takes care of him. He doesn't have to cook. He doesn't have to so much as roll over. He gets 30 days to just be in the pain. But on day 31, you get up and you try and pick up your life to the best of your ability. During that 30 days, he went to his teacher. He went to his spiritual teachers and tried to make sense of these things and tried to be with the pain, but also be with a higher truth. And it didn't happen overnight, but eventually what he did was realize there was a victim at either end of the gun that night. And that's exactly how he says it. There was a victim at both ends of that gun. A 14-year-old kid whose life was essentially over, and his 20-year-old in-college beautiful son whose physical life was over. And so he created the Tariq Kamisa Foundation. And now he goes out and talks to people about peace and forgiveness and how to live beyond the story. Now, the story of a parent who has seen a child murdered, and I don't care that Tariq was 20 years old. I promise you, to his mom and dad, he was still their baby. Yeah? And all the parents are like, uh-huh. He could have been in that story for the rest of her life. He could have gotten bitter. He could have stayed in that sense of hopelessness and fear and pain. And I don't think most of us would blame him. It's a horrible way to lose a kid. It's horrible to lose a kid anyway, right? So that's what makes his story so much more amazing to me, is that one day while he was talking with the lawyers during the process, he ended up in a conversation with someone named Ples Felix. Ples is a Southern Baptist and takes his spirituality and his need for prayer just as to heart as Ahim does, in a slightly different way, in a slightly different language, but to them it is the bedrock of who they are. Now, the thing about Ples is he found out about the murder the following morning when he tried to go pick up his grandson and was told, no, he won't be coming home with you today. He is a suspect in a murder. This is the daddy that Tony ran away from. And while they were both in the same office, Ahim was able to reach out to Ples and grant forgiveness. I mean, they hadn't even gone to trial yet. This was early days. And the two of them came together to tell their stories to kids all over the country and probably around the world by now, to talk about what does it mean to forgive. It doesn't mean that it's okay to shoot somebody. In November of 2018, Tony, now in his 30s, probably 40s, went before the parole board for the first time. And Ahim went and testified on his behalf, saying it took a few years, but Ahim actually went and saw Tony in the prison and became one of his mentors. And they became friends. And he told Tony, when you get out, you will have a job with this foundation because you have a story to tell that's important. So I want you just to take a moment and put yourself in Ahim's shoes. You've lost your son. He's been murdered by this punk kid. How do you feel about that punk kid? Or Ples or Daddy. Imagine I tried to save this kid and somehow I didn't do it. And now another kid is murdered. And I'm faced with the kid's father across the table. Can you feel that? Can you feel the discomfort of that? What about Tony, who has to live with it for the rest of his life? And somehow still find a way to feel himself to be a person of worth. When our society takes our convicts, anybody who's been convicted of a felony, and basically defines them by the worst thing they ever did. The worst thing they have ever done. It's amazing to me that Tony is still alive. So we all know that in America we have a huge prison population, right? It's millions and millions of people are incarcerated right now. And the stat that gets thrown around all the time is that as of 2016, the United States is about 4.4% of the world's population, and yet we house around 22% of the prisoners. Here's another stat that I found that made me go, The Bureau of Justice Statistics says the annual cost of mass incarceration in the United States is $81 billion. $81 billion. Can you think of something better to do with $81 billion? Or maybe a fraction of it? I mean, we could all go out to lunch for that, right? Not for nothing, but there is a group called the Prison Policy Initiative that says it's closer to $182 billion. And so we have this way of looking at the world based on the idea of a God that is punishing, that said in order to do the right thing, we must punish transgressors. Well, what if we're wrong and this doesn't work as well as we think it should? Thought experiment. How many of you just went, what the heck is she going to? Why is she's crazy. I'm not saying release Hannibal Lecter, okay? He can stay between the pages of the book. But what if the experiments being done with restorative justice that are a fraction of the cost and don't require incarceration afterwards, what if restorative justice that is the God of the Old Testament and the New Testament, what if that is more effective than the idea of punishment? B.F. Skinner literally wrote the book on behavioral psychology and said punishment is the least effective form of behavior change. It's the least effective. So what if, based on the changed idea, the ability to, hear farts, the idea that perhaps God is not out to get us, that the divine within us absolutely adores us and is just waiting for us to allow it in. What if we can change the world and the divine idea of freedom and restoration to the whole takes hold of this country and this planet, And rather than throwing away people, throwing them into prison for the rest of their life, what if we could call those people home to their own hearts? What if we could have them face the people they hurt and find a way to get to forgiveness somehow on both sides? What if we could turn lives around and, boost the economy, boost, not waste money on stuff that really apparently isn't effective? What if? Those are two powerful words, yes? What if that sense of being set free from a prison is exactly what you are owed by the universe yourself? Is exactly what you get to do when you wake up to realize or learn, just like those little first graders, that the world's a different place to different people. And you get to learn that the divine loves you just as you are and just as you are not. And wants to love you into wholeness, not discipline, not punish, not shame, but love you into a wholeness that is beyond words, into a sense of perfection that is beyond words, and into your own power and your own love and your own joy in order to create a world that works for everyone, where there's no need for prisons because we've healed the underlying issues. What if? What if we were willing to change our story about how this world works and what it is? I am willing to find out. I am willing to see that happen. Anyone with me? So let's pray that into being. Prayer is one of our primary tools. And I do it from the same level as all of y'all,